proclamation, and I'll share part of it at least. Whereas y'all may know, the commemoration of National Caribbean American Heritage Month was passed back in 2006. And during the month, we celebrate the tremendous contributions of Caribbean Americans and pay tribute to the common culture that unites United States and Caribbean countries. And whereas for centuries, Caribbean Americans have enriched our society and added to the strength of America. And they have been leaders in government, sports, entertainment, the arts, and many other fields. Whereas much of South Carolina's early economic, social, political, and cultural customs were heavily influenced by the Caribbean island colony of Barbados, which lent a distinct character unlike any other English settlements in North America. We led a trip down there last fall. Amazing connections also with us in Barbados. In the article revealing Charleston's roots, it's noted that 5 of the first 6 South Carolina governors came from Barbados. Whereas after the Revolutionary War, the British gave loyalists the option to either seek refuge in Canada or the Bahamas, with many loyalist refugees coming from Charleston and bringing with them much of Charleston's culture, politics, architecture, and material objects. Among these was a printing press used by the Wells family of Charleston to produce the first newspaper of the Bahamas, called the Bahama Gazette. And I used to visit a family friend down at Green Turtle Key. And when I visited there, they have a little museum, a little house museum. And it tells the story of the South Carolinians who came and settled in Abacos particularly. But you can just see it all around you in the architecture, even in the names of the families. What a common thread that we share. Whereas during the month of June, we honored the friendship between the United States and Caribbean countries with which we are united by our common values and shared history. The city joins all Americans in celebrating the rich Caribbean heritage and many ways in which Caribbean Americans have helped shape this nation. We honor Caribbean American Heritage Month with the carnival celebration of Charleston Carifest. Submerged in education and culture, the festival showcases a different Caribbean country each year. Of course, this year in 2023, the celebration features the Bahamas with 3 days of food, music, costumes, creative and artistic expression of the Caribbean people. This is the fun part where I say, now, therefore, I, John J. Tecklenburg, Mayor of the City of Charleston, do hereby proclaim the month of June 2021 as Caribbean American Heritage Month, and this week as Charleston Carifest Days in honor of the Bahamas.
And so we're going to flow through conversations around the connections that Mayor Tecklenburg so eloquently presented, the ways in which the Bahamas both collectively as a nation, but also in spaces and places that are personified as individuals have been making impact in ways that are far less known and of which we're often far less aware than I think we should be. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Bahamas more broadly, and because I'm not just a culture nerd, I'm a lover of history and culture, we're going to talk about art and culture. So those are the questions in a nutshell. I promise there are no real surprises. And I want to start, and every single question is open to the entire panel. I'm going to direct this first question to Ambassador Jones and Professor Curry. And we refer to the International African American Museum as the IAM, so feel free not to say the International African American Museum every single time you describe us. So at the IAM, we spend quite a lot of time exploring the physical and cultural movements of peoples of African descent, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, and the ways in which that movement informs and impacts various communities of African descent. And one of those examples, which has already been referenced, so my thunder was a little bit stolen there, is the movement of loyalists and their enslaved to the islands of the Bahamas. And being that we're here in Charleston, I just really wanted to hear from you what you feel it means to Bahamians and from your perspective to African Americans as well, for that kind of history and that sort of relationality to be elevated. And what do we share that we might not always realize? I think so often within the African diaspora in particular, we spend so much time thinking about how we are distinct from each other that we don't always realize how connected we are. And so I just am hoping you can share both the significance of that connection and what it is that we share that I think sometimes we're not always aware of.
Well, thank you so very much. It's a very long question.
I am in history. So.
I would like to thank the mayor and all of the organizers of this event for welcoming us so warmly here to Charleston. I looked forward to this presentation this evening, and I must confess that I made some notes that I'm not going to refer to. But you've been very kind to put on this symposium, Mr. CG and your staff out of Atlanta, and thank you so very much for inviting me to participate. I've been the ambassador in the United States now for going on 14 months, and I'm enjoying it immensely because it gives me an opportunity to travel around the United States and to see the wonderful cities in the United States as I am now here in Charleston, South Carolina. The story of the Bahamas and South Carolina is the story of intrigue. It has been a very colorful history, and we have done a poor job as a people in not including all of this in civic education in the Bahamas as well as in the United States of America. The way our nation, the Bahamas, has been populated, the way our economy has grown, they are all attributed to many factors, and they are attributed mostly to the impact of the loyalists when they visited the Bahamas or when they were forced to bring their slaves to the Bahamas hundreds of years ago. The story of the Bahamas, of course, is the story that begins with the landfall of Christopher Columbus in 1492 and opening the Bahamas, opening the New World, really. And so we are very grateful that the Bahamas has played such a pivotal role in our civilization, really. And so we have been receiving guests, people who have migrated from Europe to the Bahamas for well over 500 years. As it turned out, South Carolina and the islands, I beg your pardon, the states in the southern part of the United States, you would find many Bahamians who are very tied to the loyalists. It was a group of Americans called the Loyalists from Carolina and Florida who first settled in many areas of the Bahamas, places like Hopetown in Abaco, and islands like Exuma, and going to the southeast, places like Cat Island, Acklands, Mayaguana, and places such. You would also appreciate that the Bahamas is a country of 700 islands, and the many vestiges of the loyalists, they remain in those islands of the Bahamas even today. By 1825, I think it was, the descendants of the settlers of the various islands of the Bahamas, the loyalists went to these islands, taking their slaves to work, many of them involved in the production of cotton. That lasted some years, and many of the loyalists, they returned to the United States of America, leaving many of the slaves there to fend for themselves. And so the story is told that as a people from Carolinas, as they poured into Nassau, some were establishing cotton estates on the sparsely settled out islands. We now call them the family islands of the Bahamas. They soon made up the majority of the population. They sought dominance in politics and created understandable amount of resentment among some of the people who had settled there. And so the political, cultural, and social transformation that resulted was enormously impactful, and for more than 400 or 500 years, we can say that the Bahamian history is tremendously influenced by the...
I'm going to start by talking about two diasporas. One we know about and is quite popular, and the other is not often discussed enough. We know about the transatlantic slave trade, that horrendous, dehumanizing element, unprecedented in world history, the Holocaust that brought enslaved persons to the New World. Charleston was the gateway, it seemed, to the Americas and was the place where a lot of them were disembarked. We know that the Senegal River area brought lots of enslaved persons here, particularly because of their talent, their abilities in rice cultivation. So you have the Mandingo and you have Wolofs and others who were already rice cultivators in Northwest Africa, that catchment area, part of that transatlantic slave trade. But what is not really discussed is the inter-American slave trade. And that is where the Bahamas and the Loyalists must be addressed. Because you have the dimension where enslaved persons are now moved in a sort of transnational dynamic from places like Charleston to the Bahamas, to Barbados, and back and forth. And what's significant is, with the end of the American Revolution, you have this diasporic moment where you have loyalists and enslaved persons forcibly removed to another location. We are going to talk about a demographic revolution in the Bahamas because before the Loyalists arrived, the population of the Bahamas was split almost 50-50 between whites and non-whites, whether enslaved or free persons of color. With the arrival in 1783 at the end of the American Revolution, this diasporic movement, this inter-American trade in a sense, creates for the first time a population shift in which blacks now, whether free or enslaved, are numerically superior to whites. And that moment has changed our country's path in that time colony, because we have, since that point, always had a demographic imbalance where persons of color are the majority and white persons are the minority. Now, I want to say a little bit more because what's significant is Charleston was a city of disembarkation. During the American Revolution, it was controlled by the British, and you had black loyalists that fought for the British on the side of the British, were promised by Lord Dunmore and other British officials certificates of freedom for their loyalty to the British. Now, I have stated in my own work that the black loyalists were not actually loyal to the British. They were as much loyal to the British as they were to the Patriot cause. Their loyalty was to freedom. Yeah. And so they were going to get freedom any way they could, whether it was through British or Patriot cause. But their loyalty was to freedom. So behind British lines, they have protection. And then when they are evacuated and end up in the Bahamas, they have a significant impact on Bahamian society. There is an unfortunate, I'm going to say, a hagiographic narrative. This over-the-top kind of patriotism that I'm critiquing in this point. That we have done a lot in the Bahamas in our history books to celebrate white loyalists. There was reference to a loyalist memorial park in New Plymouth on Green Turtle Key. But if you look at the symbolism in that park, you have this towering white woman figure. And about 5 spaces behind her is a cowering black woman. And to me, that's problematic. But that was because we have a narrative that tends to focus on white loyalist accomplishment. And what it does is it obfuscates the significant contributions that black loyalists made to the Bahamas.